Britain didn't panic when enslaved Jamaicans ran. They panicked when enslaved Jamaicans read, because a man who can't read can be controlled. But a man who can read can see the lie. And once you see the lie, empires don't last very long. Welcome back to Jamaica's history. If you value stories that were buried on purpose, please remember to like and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but so these stories stay alive. In colonial Jamaica, Britain planned for violence. They designed chains. They perfected punishment. They calculated rebellion as a cost of doing business. Violence was expected. Education was not, because violence could be crushed. But education spread. This is not speculation. In letters now stored in the British Colonial Office Papers, governors warned London that enslaved people who could read became difficult to manage, not rebellious, not violent, conscious. That word appears again and again. Education didn't simply teach letters. It taught comparison. It taught enslaved Jamaicans to compare what they were told with what was written, to compare law with reality, religion with brutality, empire with morality. And once comparison begins, control weakens. To Britain, an educated Black Jamaican was not progress. It was a threat to order. Officially, Britain promoted Christian instruction. They spoke of morality, civilization, improvement. But behind the language was an unwritten rule. Teach them obedience. Never teach them power. This rule was never passed as law. It didn't need to be. It was enforced through fear, surveillance, and punishment. Reading was tolerated only if it produced better workers. Writing raised suspicion. Independent thought crossed the line. Plantation owners understood this instinctively. They warned each other quietly. As historian Mary Turner documents in Slaves and Missionaries, planters complained that literacy encouraged enslaved people to misinterpret scripture and question authority. Misinterpret. That word is telling, because what they feared was not misunderstanding, but understanding too well. Then came the missionaries, Baptists, Methodists, Moravians. They arrived believing they were bringing salvation. They taught enslaved Jamaicans how to read the Bible. But the Bible did not behave as Britain expected. Because once enslaved people could read it themselves, they found stories Britain had never emphasized. Stories of bondage and escape, oppression and judgment, liberation and justice. They read about Moses, about Exodus, about a God who did not side with empires, and they asked a question that shook colonial Jamaica. If God condemns bondage, why does Britain defend it? Mission schools came under watch. This is not metaphor. Missionary letters preserved in the Baptist Missionary Society archives describe informants sitting in congregations. Lessons reported word for word. Teachers questioned. Warnings issued, because Britain understood something clearly. Whoever controls education controls the future. By the early 1800s, the fear had reached a boiling point. Enslaved Jamaicans were not just learning to read. They were learning to communicate. Across plantations, across parishes, across distances Britain thought impossible. Literacy connected people, and connection creates coordination. Then came 1831, the year Britain lost control of the narrative. Over 60,000 enslaved Jamaicans rose up in what history records as the Baptist War. This figure comes directly from British parliamentary records. It was the largest rebellion in Jamaica's history, and it did not begin with weapons. It began with words. At the center stood Sam Sharpe. He was not a soldier. He was not armed. He was literate, a preacher, a teacher. According to historian Gad Human, Sharpe used biblical literacy to explain that slavery violated both Christian morality and British law. He did not invent rebellion. He clarified freedom. And once freedom was explained clearly, it became impossible to ignore. The rebellion was crushed with brutality. Hundreds executed, thousands punished, villages burned. But Britain's rage did not stop with rebels. It turned toward education itself. Missionaries were beaten, churches destroyed, schools shut down. Colonial reports blamed religious instruction for making the enslaved too conscious, too aware, too informed, too dangerous. This moment changed British strategy forever. Britain realized something critical. Education could not be stopped completely, but it could be controlled. After emancipation, Britain did not ban schooling. They redesigned it. As historian Hilary Beckles explains in Britain's Black Debt, education was redirected toward discipline. Curriculum emphasized labor, skills over strategy, obedience over analysis. Leadership training became rare. Critical thinkers were labeled agitators. Education survived, but liberation was removed from it. This created a bottleneck, a narrow pathway to power, a system where advancement required approval, where questioning authority carried consequences, where education existed, but only within safe limits. The effects did not end in the 1800s. They lingered, delayed access to higher education, restricted leadership pipelines, a cultural memory that questioning power is dangerous. Even today, the echoes remain. Why certain histories are softened, why radical thinkers are policed, why education that challenges systems still makes institutions uncomfortable. This is not coincidence. As historian Thomas Holt notes in The Problem of Freedom, education threatened colonial control long before emancipation and continued to do so afterward. The fear never disappeared. It adapted. Britain did not fear educated Black Jamaicans because they would read books. They feared them because they would read the system. They would see patterns, contradictions, hypocrisy. And once a people can read the system, they no longer need the empire that built it. Books did not free Jamaica alone, but they made freedom inevitable. And that is why this story matters, because telling it is still an act of resistance. Education was never neutral. It was always power. And when Black Jamaicans learned to read, the empire learned to fear.